we want to turn our attention now back to Mexico, which just had a historic presidential election. Claudia Sheinbaum was elected president there, first woman president of Mexico, or of any country, by the way, in North America, or what is known as North America. A lot of implications here. So to dig into all of this, we are very, very honored to be joined on the show once again by John Ackerman, who's a professor at the Institute for Legal Research at UNAM there in Mexico. John, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thank you, Eugene Rania. A real pleasure to be with you. I don't know how long was the last time we talked. A few
months here.
A real pleasure. Yeah.
Well, hey, the pleasure is all ours. And maybe let's just start here with, some of the bigger picture issues as it concerns the election. For those who maybe don't know, I mean, who is Claudia Sheinbaum? She's mayor of Mexico City. But what does this victory really represent in terms of continuity or change in terms of Mexico's trajectory?
So this is a huge victory for the left in Mexico and Latin America, I would dare say the world. Because in 2018, López Obrador came into power after about 30 years of intense neoliberal policies, various electoral frauds against him and his colleagues. That was a major achievement, but he still didn't have complete control over the government, of course, because many of the state governments of the legislature itself were really struggling against this social and political transformation. Of course, the oligarchs, the United States, this was a real challenge. The big question was whether this was going to be just a flash in the pan or whether this was actually going to be the beginning of a new historic moment for Mexico. Now we're 6 years later, 2024, and MORENA, his party, has just swept the entire country. MORENA now governs 24 of the 32 states. They're still doing the final calculations, but MORENA has also won, it looks like, 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress, both Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. It has also ratified its control over Mexico City, and with a woman she was an academic, she was a professor, a climate scientist for a long time. Always been politically active, a student activist, was mayor of Mexico City. Her platform was to continue on build the second floor of the fourth transformation, winning 60% of the vote. 2-1 over the second place candidate, Xochitl Galvez, who was actually the candidate of almost all the parties together. Totally different, strange bedfellows. You have the PRI, which is the old authoritarian party, the PAN, which is the Christian Democratic right-wing party, the PRD, which used to be the left-wing party, which sold out about 5-10 years ago. They all kind of came together, ganged up against López Obrador, and they only got about 28% of the vote against the 60% for Claudia Sheinbaum. Over the last 30 years of democratic transition, no president has gotten that level of support. We've had presidents that have gotten 37%, up to 50%, but 60%. This is a major mandate. It's a major blowout, and this is a big opportunity for the next 6 years. This is a 6-year presidency for Claudia Sheinbaum to really leave a mark on North America, Mexico, and Latin America.
Well, I actually think that this is hugely important regionally as well. You're talking about obviously domestically, Mexico is a huge country. It's very, very important. It's also in a tough position in a sense because Mexico has this really close relationship with the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is its neighbor, and obviously because of those 30 years of basically like neoliberal leaders, you do have a very integrated U.S. being very integrated into the Mexican economy. That said, having a more progressive government in Mexico could be very beneficial for progressives across the region. Can you talk a little bit about how this could benefit the, pink tide 2.0, as they like to call it, whether you like that framing or not, whether it could benefit that move across the region?
Yeah, most definitely. So when López Obrador came in 2018, he was pretty much alone, and ideologically speaking, actually the only sitting president who came to his inauguration, December 1st, 2018, with Evo Morales, who was still president of Bolivia at that time. Then Maduro showed up last minute, unannounced. But basically all the other governments at that moment had already, the first wave had ended, and we were in the middle of right-wing governments all over Latin America. Since then, since the López Obrador victory, we've had a whole second wave, of course. and the continuation of the Morena in Mexico means a great deal for Latin American unity, because now Mexico is no longer alone. We have Lula da Silva, who's come back in Brazil. We have Gustavo Petro, who has been, a really brave international leader from Colombia, tweeting down Netanyahu and live on X, right? So those are the three largest countries in Latin America in terms of population: Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia. Now we've had some setbacks, of course, in Argentina. Right? You have this crazy Milei figure who's thinks he's Trump in South America. But in general, you have Boric in Chile, who's is kind of a social democrat, lukewarm kind of guy. But he's given the history of Chilean politics, he's definitely on the progressive side. So there's a real possibility to continue bringing together Latin America. There's been a proposal on the table, for instance, to get rid of the Organization of American States and have that be replaced by CELAC, which is a community of Latin American Caribbean nations, which of course is based in Latin America. Well, of course, the OAS is in Washington, and so there are lots of different possibilities of rethinking the geopolitical role of Latin America. Now, of course, Mexico is very much subordinated to the United States. 80-90% of our commerce, external commerce, goes to the United States. We're also, between one or two or three that major trading partner of the United States. There's this whole idea that Mexico needs to help the United States in its battle against China, commercial battle against China, which has kind of permeated through lots of the Mexican political class, including, unfortunately, part of the left. And so it's going to be interesting to see exactly how things fall on those issues in the new government. And of course, we can't. We need to put a lot more emphasis, like we just mentioned at the beginning, that this is the first female president in the history of Mexico. Mexico's supposed to be a macho country. Yeah, we got lots of machos here, of course, but you have it in the United States and all over the world. But actually, Mexico is actually not such a surprise that it might seem to people who don't know Mexico very well. It's actually the last 10, 15 years, we've had a real push towards gender equality. Yeah, Mexico City passed same-sex marriage and abortion before San Francisco. This was like 20 years ago. And we have a new constitutional reform from 3 or 4 years ago, which requires absolutely all collective public bodies, like cabinets or the electoral council or the Supreme Court or the Chamber of Deputies or the senators, to be absolutely equal in terms of gender parity, right? So the Mexican Congress is 50-50, men and women. The Supreme Court is just about there through their recent appointments. And so to have a woman president is very, very much a logical step within this progress in terms of gender equality in Mexico and the political sphere in recent years.
Well, John, as I'm sure you've seen, the ideological offensive in the U.S. and the big press is already on in terms of their takeaways of the election. And there's a lot of talk about, the Plan C and the issue of the reforms and the possibility, the way that I saw it presented in The Economist, basically, that, they'll destroy all regulatory and reform agencies. But I know that this is a big factor because it's addressing some of the things AMLO was stymied by because of the legal process. So if you could talk about sort of this second story, the Plan C, and some of the things that Ms. Sheinbaum has proposed that were very popular, but that obviously have already drawn the ire, I think, of a lot of the big business-linked press around the world.
Yes, this is a bit. So for the last 30 years of the Democratic kind of transition, they call it transition, but it wasn't actually as fast as people saw it being. There's been a very intense division between the different parties. So there have been 3 major parties, PRI, PAN, and PRD, who have basically divided up government. And now, all of a sudden, there's going to be one hegemonic party, right? And this does remind people of what existed before, right? The party of the Institutional Revolution dominated the entire political sphere between the 40s and the 80s. And so people are saying that what's happening now is a return to the previous system of a single hegemonic party. But the actual story is very different, because this single hegemonic party is actually the outsider party, right, which had been excluded totally through from this democratic transition, from obviously the previous system as well. And so the victory of López Obrador in 2018 and of Claudia Sheinbaum in 2024 is not really a pro-establishment power grab, but it's part of this resistance to the economic and political powers that be. And the blowout, the total victories last Sunday was surprising even to those of us who sympathize with the left. And it's shocking, these international financial press, because theoretically, right, they're especially worried about the month of September, because the new Congress comes in the 1st of September, and Claudia Sheinbaum comes in the 1st of October. And López Obrador from past February presented a whole array of a dozen constitutional reforms. As you mentioned, it's called the Plan C. This is the idea that I can get into the history of that, but it's called Plan C because these reforms were not originally passed by Congress, because Congress was not, MORENA didn't have a control over the 2/3 of that of Congress, and so they was rejected by Congress. That was the Plan A, and then Plan B was that the Supreme Court also threw the second version out, and so the Plan C was that the third version is going directly to the voters and have the voters decide, right, not Congress or the court, but kind of a plebiscite is what we had this last Sunday. And so what kind of reforms is López Obrador talking about? He wants to democratize the judiciary. So, for instance, he wants the Supreme Court ministers to be elected by popular vote. This would be a huge change in Mexico, of course, because the Supreme Court and the judiciary is sort of the bastion of conservative thinking, as it is in many countries. And to have an electoral vote for them would turn them into, the international financial press is afraid, into these, populist people who decide based on, general, democratic interests and not on their sort of more abstract interpretations of law in accord with, economic stability, however they understand it. So that's one big reform. There's another electoral reform. He wants to change the way in which the distribution of the seats in the House and the Senate is made. A pro-indigenous reform, giving more rights to local communities in Oaxaca and Chiapas, particularly in the southern part of Mexico. There's a whole the electoral authorities themselves also have this problem that the electoral authorities tend to be sort of isolated from citizen opinion. He wants to that lead counselors and magistrates, electoral magistrates, also to be elected by popular vote. He's already done this some part of the way, but he wants to advance in making social rights in the Constitution, rights for elderly to youth to have scholarships and support from the state. There's a whole long list of social and political reforms that he wants to push through, and with this, if these 2/3 actually, the final decision is going to be the next few days by the electoral authorities. But if that actually happens in September, he'll basically be able to do whatever he wants. And that's kind of scary for these guys. Another big issue, energy reform, for instance, lithium. One of the major reforms that López Obrador tried to get through, he couldn't get through Congress, was to nationalize completely the lithium deposits in Mexico. You remember this was actually one of the reasons why Evo Morales was submitted to fraud, coup d'etat, in his re-election effort in 2019, because of the very important strategic nature of lithium. López Obrador would also like to nationalize lithium. So all these things are, of course, going to be of concern to the international press, but are exciting for us here in Mexico, because the fact is that these first 6 years, the changes were relatively slow because of all this resistance from the opposition. And with this new stage, the next 6 years, that's very important. It's a 6-year period. It's not 4, not 3, not 2, it's 6 years. Big things might happen. But we still have this pressure from the United States. That's the big boot on our neck, of course.
Yeah, no, absolutely, for sure. Well, we'll hope for positive developments here in the United States to enforce more positive developments there in Mexico. But as always, John, we really appreciate you having you on. John Ackerman, professor at the Institute for Legal Research at UNAM. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you, Eugene. Ranyak, please come visit us soon. No, once if Trump comes in November, you're going to have to come running down south to look for democracy here in Mexico City. And Mexico City is a wonderful place. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a great place to live, and we'd love to see you guys and your audience too. It's please come get to know Mexico City and Mexico. It's a wonderful country.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, John.